Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got a special guest here with me today for our fireside chat. You probably recognize him. This is Billy Davis with Herefish by Bullhorn. You may know him as Build by Billy or the automation robot, goes by all these titles. And, today we're going to be talking about when candidates stop applying, how to bypass crisis mode. So there's a lot of things that add so much value here that I've just had some really good dialogue with Billy, and we want to share it with you. So we're going to cover everything about why creating a quality experience for all candidates really does matter, how systematizing your processes can drive company profitability and growth, the importance of making your database really a single source of truth, not only for your sales and your recruiting, but also for your marketing. And then we'll dive into some bonus do's and don'ts from the automation robot himself, things that he's seen through how many countless implementations. So Billy, before we dive in, I wanted to share with the crew, you actually started as a recruiter, then moved into a business intelligence analyst role within a staffing firm, and you've been a part of growing Herefish since, right?
Yeah, it's been a fun journey, and it's one of the interesting things about me is I was automating and staffing before staffing automation existed. So it's interesting to kind of see the full growth and see how big it's become.
That's so fun. Awesome. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started then? So why don't you share a little bit more with us about really how creating that quality experience for all of your candidates matters, and ultimately how it ladders up to kind of bypassing that crisis mode when candidates aren't applying.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because that's usually when the rubber hits the road, when you become in a candidate short market, where all of a sudden your inbound sources dry up, and then you kind of have to figure out, okay, it's crisis mode. We need candidates to fill jobs. Yeah. Clients are coming to you. You can't beat clients away because everyone needs to hire somebody, right? So, so I think it's a great time to focus on this. But as with most things, if you could preemptively and proactively do this, then you'd be ahead of the game and you'd be in a good spot, even in these environments. So, I mean, what we see, especially in the staffing industry, is your best source of candidates is always going to be referrals, testimonials, that kind of social proof, that kind of word of mouth type marketing.
Right.
And the biggest component to gaining that is to provide a good experience. Because if you don't provide a good experience, nobody's going to refer anyone to you because they're going to keep them away. It's going to be the opposite of what you want. So, I mean, that's a really crucial aspect to it. But then also it makes you more effective. And you want to be able to nurture and kind of have that consultative approach where you can build and establish relationships, because those are the things that will last over time. And if you just purely view staffing from a transactional sense, that's where you're going to get in trouble, because then you're easily replaceable. Then it's whoever has a job, whoever calls you first. You really want to try to deepen that connection, that bond, because that's how you can really grow a community and actually leverage your database.
Yeah. And I talk to a lot of recruiting firm or staffing firm owners and people that have desks themselves. And they're just like, man, I don't have time to get back to every single person and stay in touch with people. And I get it. Even when I talk to friends who have not used a recruiter before, I just give them the heads up, apply, have that conversation, but know that they're going to have thousands of people in their database. And ultimately they're looking to make a placement with their client, and the client's the one paying them. But, they're going to try their best probably to have a relationship with you, but just know it's okay if you ping them back if you haven't heard in a month, right? But do you have advice on whether it's automating the process or just doing things like maybe creating video content that benefits those candidates and sending it out? Like how have you seen recruiters do a good job where, you can't physically have conversations that are a half an hour each with every person that applies? There's just not enough time in the day.
Yeah, I that's a great question. I think the best thing you can do is put yourself in the shoes of the candidate and think about, how would I want to be treated if I was applying to a role? Because that's really going to steer you to having best practices for all of your experience. So the biggest thing that the staffing industry comes against reputation wise is that kind of lack of feedback, lack of transparency, or not knowing or updates of what's going on. So just kind of being left in the dark, and then it's on you from a candidate perspective to try to chase down the recruiter. So automation and technology obviously is essential to doing that. to fixing that. Because
Right.
to your point, if you have hundreds or thousands of candidates that you're working with, there's not enough time in the day to reach out to them individually and to make that happen. So you need to have a system, a process, some technology in your tech stack to be able to do that in the right way. And the great part is when you do that correctly, you have control over crafting what that experience and journey looks like. So you can be, very intentional with what's important, things that you want to pass along. And then there's lots of great things you can do that are scalable, from leveraging your experience being an expert in the industry. So what are you seeing from hiring trends, interview tips, those things that even if you can't help somebody with a job, still leave them with a positive experience of something that was helpful.
Something that they can take away from. Yep, absolutely.
And that goes a long way, and that separates, from the traditional experience that many receive from a staffing firm. So that's a big differentiator. And then obviously, I think the interesting part, and this is the part where I put my kind of prophecy hat on, is I think the candidate market, their expectations are gradually starting to shift where that is becoming expected. So now today, and in the past, it was a differentiator if you did those things. Sure, in the future, it's going to be the baseline expectation. And then I think the differentiator will be those non-scalable things that by their essence, that someone spent time doing, like a handwritten note or a card. And like,
right. That has a different.
You can't automate that. There's someone literally took the intention to write it out, mail it, those types of things. So like that's where you can put those cherries on top from an experience standpoint. Right. But if that's what you're doing and you're not doing the essential stuff, then you're lost, because you got to do the basics before you can do kind of the high end or the cherry on top things.
Right. And I know you and I are both of that mindset, right? Like parkermarketing.com, we've got a whole resource section so that if the timing is right to partner or the timing's not right to partner, or you have a whole in-house marketing team, regardless, right? You can still go out and see ebooks and webinars and things like that. And same with you, you do a really good job of sending out, is it weekly, your email that goes out?
Yeah. So I have 3 different newsletters that go out, different content, and a bunch of tutorial videos and things.
Yeah. So just as a, a takeaway on that note for anybody listening, obviously got immense appreciation for everything you've got going on running your desk or, leading a company. And obviously it's not possible to have that handwritten approach with every single person. Right. But if you can take those best practices and share them, but also manage those expectations, like when you're having a conversation with a candidate, share with them, like, this is kind of a typical cadence of what we see, so that they don't feel upset if you're not reaching out to them every 3 days, because that is not realistic unless you actively are presenting them somewhere. So actually that leads into our next conversation point really well. So how systematizing your process can drive not only company profitability, but also growth. So not only create systems that take care of people that you can help or maybe can't help right now or in the future, but overall systemization can create profitability and growth. You want to share more about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's an essential component for growth, or at least doing growth in a sustainable and efficient way. Because what we see commonly is, when you're a smaller staffing firm, you can get away with not really having standardized process and kind of letting everyone do their own thing. But as you grow and add additional recruiters, different departments, layers get more complex. Then all of a sudden, if you don't have it systematized, you don't have that standard operating procedure, you start fighting yourself, because then you don't know what's happening. It's very tough to track. So, standardization is kind of the base layer for being able to automate, because if things are happening all across the board, it's going to be really difficult to design a system for that to work. But if you know consistently what's supposed to happen, then you can build in those triggers, reminders, those kind of automation steps to ensure it does. But it also, from a training perspective, think of the opposite experiences of training someone where you don't have those things, and then they're just kind of shadowing and trying to figure out what their own flow is going to be. But that could take potentially years before someone gets comfortable doing that. And then, juxtapose that to having something where you have a whole operating system, kind of a playbook, where they feel extremely comfortable about going in, just kind of following the instructions, and then they can add their own flair in certain areas, kind of grow into it. But the biggest thing I see in that is, you have an opportunity to take what works well from your highest performers and make that your standard operating procedure.
Sure.
So, and that's how you adhere to best practices, how you really grow, is if you can train everyone to those standards, or like that becomes your baseline, then that's where magic happens. Because someone new coming in, that's all they're going to know, is that kind of high level that you hope for them to deliver.
Right. So you get to establish the excellence, and your title, I was checking it out on LinkedIn, was Director of Implementation and Customer Success. So I'm sure you have these conversations with smaller firms and really large firms, companies that talk to us and work with us too, like the ones that are considering like an automation tool or already using Herefish. The sizes really vary.
Big time.
Yeah. So I'm sure just that idea of creating a playbook based on the best examples you have in your company. I mean, that's going to look different for every company, but I'm sure, maybe we'll hit more on that in the bonus area of do's and don'ts, because I'm sure there's things that you've seen people recreate the wheel, or, go around it way more than they need to. So we'll circle back on that. Want to chat a little bit more about the importance of making your database your single source of truth. As a marketer, there's so much value in being able to see just that purity of data. And I want to say, I don't know that anybody has purely pure data like that, especially in the recruiting industry, right? Because you have someone applying and you can only control the inputs that they have. So right there, you've got kind of like sources that are not controllable. But can you speak to the importance of it, and also how you've seen people do it well, and what happens when it works really well, when there's a little bit better clarity in your database?
Yeah, so I've seen it personally on both sides of things, and traditionally marketing in a lot of places is siloed away from sales or recruitment. So it really, it's difficult to have that cohesion as a team if you're operating in separate systems. Not one hand's not talking to the other, and it adds a lot more work. If you're a marketer and you have to import, export, and kind of manually do your segments. That takes up a ton of time, especially with all the campaigns you're doing. Whereas if you can pull that dynamically from things that are happening already, that completely gets eliminated from your list, and you can focus on the marketing stuff and designing things and creating a better experience. The other component is just from a data consistency and data quality side of things. Because if things are in separate areas and they don't talk to each other, the only way to unify that is manually, and that just doesn't get done at scale with people that are so busy they don't have time anyways, right? So you don't know who's opening or clicking, in the place that you would look more often. You have to go somewhere else to try to find that information, or try to gather that. So if you have everything point back to your database, all of a sudden, all eyes in the company and everything important is in the same location. So it's much easier. And then you can amplify things. And the biggest piece of advice I would impart is, if it's not in the database, it didn't happen. So like, we put that rule in place because, of course, whenever you try to do change management, you're always going to hear, oh, well, I did that, I just didn't put a note in, or, oh, I just forgot to log it, but I did that. And you can't enforce anything. You can't have data. You can't have metrics without that. If it's not in the database, it didn't happen. And if you get to that point and start kind of, converting and showing your recruiters why it's a better system for them, and that's a key component, is you have to make it work for them. If you lead with too much stick and not enough carrot, then you're going to get fought the entire way. But if you can show recruiters how it's going to make them more money and make their job easier, then
they'll be on board.
100%. They'll be your biggest proponents.
Well, and I just see so much value in having Herefish directly integrated and a part of Bullhorn, because that's historically always been the challenge. And even myself growing up as a marketer in the staffing and recruiting industry, saying, okay, we're going to run campaigns out of, way back when, like a Constant Contact, and then, or even like a HubSpot, Park is on HubSpot. I really like it, but you got this unique challenge in the staffing and recruiting industry where you need an ATS, period. When I talk to marketers who don't know this industry, they're like, oh, we'll just get them on fill in the blank, right? Like get them on this marketing automation tool because they all have CRMs, but it's not that easy. And I do know plenty of staffing firms that have a sales leader come in from out of the industry and say, we need more capabilities within our CRM. So they have like an ATS and a CRM and then a separate marketing automation platform. And that can work with a lot of interconnection with it, right? It takes legwork, but it can work. But in this industry, by and large, you have an ATS. And now all of a sudden you want to automate the touch points of your consultants that are in the field, or you want to know when a potential client downloads an ebook, like if those two things live completely isolated from each other, it to your point, like it creates more of a challenge, right? If a recruiter's like, well, why'd we do this whole ebook thing anyway? But now all of a sudden, if they can see a candidate and see their journey and see what's happening, it creates a lot more value.
Yeah, and unifying disparate silos is possible, but it's incredibly resource heavy and complex, because you basically have to, create a map, of what goes where. You got to have third-party integrations to tie them together. If something breaks in one place, all of a sudden you got to follow the breadcrumbs to figure out where else it has impact. Whereas it's so much simpler to have it all come from one place. So especially like on the website side, I see that all the time too. Like if you have a website that you're trying to capture, website forms or applications, and it doesn't come into your database, like that's a deal breaker for me. Like everything, if I was a staffing firm today, everything that I would look at from a technology perspective, my first question would be, how does it integrate to my single source of truth?
Right.
And if it doesn't, that would be almost a deal breaker unless it was something incredible that I had to have.
Right. Well, and then you get into even just the marketing and SEO side of jobs, for example. I would say 98% of the industry, whatever ATS they have, it connects to their website, right? Through an iframe or through a link that points off. But all of a sudden, if you can get that custom integrated job board where you have the same functionality, the user experience is the same for you internally, but it looks better on the outside. It can get found by Google Jobs. Like it's cool to see how, the tech side of it and the marketing side of it are so seamlessly integrated to create a better experience and to drive more revenue.
Well, and the other component too is the whole that you can build becomes bigger than the individual parts combined when it's all integrated together. So you can create extremely powerful campaigns and things that trigger off of each other. You can create these kind of cyclical effects that the automation just continues to run, and you get value from it over and over again. And basically the more input you put into it, the more value you get. It's like that's the end goal of where you want to end up. And really the simplest and quickest way there is to have everything point back and get to that utopia that is the single source of truth, your database.
Right. No, exactly. And make your internal teams' lives easier, make your external audiences, your clients and your candidates have a better experience with you. It creates efficiency and costs. I mean,
well, one of my favorite success stories ever, and we hear this commonly, so it's great to hear it, but the shift from recruiters looking to third-party sourcing tools as their first go-to place, the shift from that to them looking into the database first.
Yes.
Once you start cleaning things up, once you point out that 50, 60, 70% of people that they're finding on a third-party site actually existed in the database at some point, but they just lost contact. So and of course, from an operations side, if you can make that switch, it's incredible, because all of a sudden you can eliminate that expense and put it in towards something else and kind of snowball that investment.
Right. And then as you continue on in the growth or trajectory of your company and you bring on more recruiters and you train them by that playbook, your source of truth will just continue to be more and more clear. So as you're doing your searches within your database, you're able to find the right people because people are tagging them in a consistent way. And then my mind goes to when you actually start building out automations, and the example I referenced before, like you want to have touch points with your consultants that normally would be manual. Well, now all of a sudden you don't need them to be manual, because it's based on if this status changes, it triggers this workflow, right? And it just, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. We won't bore everyone. Why don't we jump into bonus? Are there any do's and don'ts based on your experience? I mean, you probably do. Do you have a count of how many implementations you've done, how many companies you've worked with at this point?
Yeah, it's in the 400s currently. something
Wow.
along those lines. I
Okay.
don't know the exact number, but yeah, we're almost halfway to 4 digits.
Wow. Well, and you mentioned on our, when we were chatting prior to this, how many automations you guys were scaling toward. I think you should share that too, because that was a crazy number. And if you could
Yeah,
define what
so
you mean by that too.
yeah, so in July, over 60 million individual automation kind of actions occurred just in that month alone from our client base. And that's about a 500% increase year over year from what we're seeing. So it's incredible to see that kind of exponential curve happen with growth and see really the industry adopt this. So an automation step could be something outbound. So it could be an email, a survey, a text message. It could be something inbound. So a task created, a notification sent internally. It could be a field update. So we saw 25 million field updates last month.
Jeez.
So when you talk about data quality, data health, those things where you have fields talking to one another and updating themselves, or you're asking candidates for an input and then writing that directly back to the database. So obviously that's a huge use case. But the thing that I'm most pumped up about is like I see that growth. I see where we're headed. We're attacking things from multiple angles to help clients get more use out of the tool. Like we're not too far away from over 100 million actions per month happening. And then even, 12, 18 months from now, we are on the path to 1 billion things per month, which is just, it kind of blows your mind as far as all the value of the things that can get delivered with some of those numbers.
I know I would love to get you and Maurice Fuller in one room. For everybody listening to this who probably knows Maurice Fuller, right, from Staffing Tech and TechVantage, and just talking about what those predictions are, because they are so rapidly increasing for this industry. Like I remember when I got into it back in 2011, something like that. I mean, your table stakes were like constant contact, social. Yeah, of course you had a website. Like everybody knew to do these things, but Billy, what year would you say people started really adopting this whole automation? I mean, when was Herefish originally founded? Just a few years ago.
Yeah, 2015, 2016 was originally founded. And the funny part was it got founded originally pretty much as a marketing automation tool. So it's kind of a consultative marketing automation tool that kind of stumbled into some of the pure database updates, some of the kind of the more functional kind of automation things. It just kind of grew and took off from there. So, but the funny part is we still might not be to the majority section yet of the market that actually is automating and doing things. So
that's a really good point. Yeah.
I think we're past the early minority phase. So we're kind of ramping up that bell curve, but there's still a lot of ground to cover. And I think the interesting part is there's so much, especially the clients that I talk to now, they kind of kick themselves that they didn't do it earlier. And they're kind of a little bit apprehensive or fearful. Like, what are my competition doing? Right. Or the companies that have been doing this for 2 years, like how far ahead are they from us, and can we ever catch up? And what I tell them is like getting the technology of the tool is step one, but then how you use it becomes really impactful. But then there's all those other layers that come in that really shines and kind of shows what value you're going to get from it. So as with any technology tool, it's kind of an amplification. So if you have good things, amplifying it is going to turn it into great. But if you don't have good, it's going to take something that's poor, and you're not going to see a ton of value from it, or it's going to be difficult. So never a bad time to fix that underlying foundation. Of course, automation can help do that as well. But once you get to a good point, you can just flourish, and that exponential growth. That we're not only seeing it in our own stuff, we see it with clients as well.
Right. Well, and I was just chatting with a staffing firm. They're about 150 million, and they said 2 years ago they were at a conference. I forget which conference, but they said they went in with a budget in hand. Like basically the individual that reports right to the CEO and the technology marketer, right? Those two came in budget in hand and said, we're behind. We got to make this happen. They invested in all these different technologies, and it's just really cool to see how they're rolling. But it's funny because talking to them now, both of these individuals in conversation said, we thought we were behind. And now we're realizing that like we were not the first to adopt by any means, but we're
Yeah.
still ahead of the game. And now we're 2 years ahead, and it's kind of crazy. You know, we have competitors that have just started doing this. We have competitors that are ahead of us. And so, you know, I don't have a good analogy, but like now is the time, because if you look back 2 years from now, if you had invested in just some of these mindsets, and even if, I mean, the point of these conversations is never to be a sales pitch for a product, but I would say even if you're at a point where you're exploring something like a Herefish or otherwise, like subscribe to one of Billy's newsletters, because it'll teach you about how these things connect. And if you're like most of the people who are probably watching this, you probably already have it, but still subscribe, because there's going to be things that I'm sure you could learn. It's just there's a few really smart minds in this industry around these topics. Billy, you're definitely one of those. And so
thank you.
Yeah, I know. And I'm just glad to have you here and chat through some things that hopefully help people regardless of where they're at on that adoption bell curve, right? Whether they're ahead of the game or are not going to get into it for the next 3 years.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people as well, is like they think of me only as what I am now, which is, you know, literally the person who's built the most automations in Herefish in the world. But what they don't realize is, you know, 2015, 2016, I was exactly in their shoes. You know, I didn't use it before. I was learning as I go, making mistakes. So, you know, the big kind of passion for me is passing along that experience, that expertise that I've gained over time to try to help people get there quicker than I did, or get there with a smoother journey where they don't have to make some of those mistakes. So that's always the great thing for me, to see that kind of light bulb turn on and go. And we've seen some really cool examples. Like we have a couple clients that have grown incredibly in the midst of the pandemic, which is just like almost an oxymoron. Everyone was kind of battering down the hatches and, like, you know, trying to keep what was there. And we had a client that's expanded 4 or 5 offices in the past couple of years. And just seeing some things that, like, I thought would happen, but it's always kind of reassuring and feels good to kind of see them actually play out the way you think it's going to happen. Like, we're seeing companies create automation teams. So literally they have a team within their operations staff that handles experience and automation, focuses on that. And they're seeing tremendous ROI. And we're seeing, you know, technology get included into recruiting recruiters. So your internal sales pitch includes the technology you use to make their life easier. And we've seen that be very effective. And then also including the technology and experience on the client and BD and sales front. Now we had a client who shared their deck, their sales deck with us. And I was just blown away on how different it is than anything else you'd ever hear and see. Because think about the traditional staffing pitch. It's, you know, our X amount of years of experience in the industry. You know, we'll work really hard for you and make sure, you know, we come through and get you the right candidate. We're, you know, the perfect matchmakers. Like it's all that kind of language. And that sales deck had none of that. It was all about, here's the experience that we create. It's, you know, we have, the traditional is we have X amount of people in our database, and they kind of brag about that. But then of course the newer pitch is, you know, how many people, what's the community that we have? How many engaged people have we spoken to? Like, what does it actually mean? Not just ones and zeros in a database that we can't connect with. Like who are the people we can actually engage and kind of chat with? So that's super satisfying to see some of those shifts and changes that have occurred.
Oh yeah, no, I love that. And it, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. That's the thing. I mean, I did a fireside chat with Maurice, and one of the things he said is there's going to be, and I forget the number, like X amount of automations by this time. And he said that's a lot. Like those things are not just going to happen instantly. It's going to take legwork and time. And I'd love to kind of leave everybody who's listening with this. Now, obviously, if you're talking about a small recruiting firm versus a massive staffing firm, this is going to look different. But could you paint the picture, you know, from adoption or size of what an internal or outsourced team could look like as staffing and recruiting firms are starting to phase into automation? You know, so you mentioned, for example, there are companies that are starting to have like individuals on their operations team. I would imagine those are companies that are in the multi-hundreds of millions of dollars that have a team already established toward different components, right? And so if they're just starting, they might not have someone internally. So I'm just curious what you see, if there's a few, and we haven't talked about this prior, but if there's kind of a few typical buckets, like if you're this size or this space of adoption, what's your next step versus, this
Yeah.
level?
Well, the funny part is usually you see those teams in larger organizations, so you're spot on. But then you start to see some anomalies where it doesn't make sense, where it's a 15 user company, but all of a sudden they have a person dedicated to doing it. And it's like,
Awesome.
And that's actually what happened to me in my business intelligence role is, and I didn't realize how atypical we were as a staffing company until years later, to know that we were, 15 to 20 users, but
Yeah.
we put the resources in having a dedicated person to handle, the database, remappings, our technology stack experience. So it was incredible to think, 2015, 2016, how kind of far ahead that was. But
Yeah.
oftentimes from a size component, and here's some of the main things that we see. So a larger organization obviously is going to have a lot of resources, a lot of teams, but
Hmm.
the challenge becomes not getting stuck in bureaucracy and kind
Sure.
of the power struggle of kind of change management and moving things through.
Mhm.
So it becomes really, really important with a large organization to start off with impactful wins, so you can build momentum and kind of get everybody on board. Because if it's a tedious process up front, even if it's really impactful, it's going to be very difficult to get kind of the whole company on board. So
Right.
usually what we see is, they kind of do a pilot group with a group that's excited about the concept, and
Mhm.
then they do something that is very high impact, low effort, so that gets that pilot group excited, and
Do
then
you have
kind
an
of track.
example of that?
Yeah, so and this kind of flows with some of the overall best practices of not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Sure.
So automation will always be the most impactful when you can focus on things that happen over and over again throughout your recruitment lifecycle. So you can do kind of complex and one-off type things, and it's going to take a lot of effort, and you're going to get some benefit from it. But the things that are the best to start with, and we have several blueprints and tutorials around these things, are
Mhm.
things like placement touch points, because obviously placements
Sure.
happen through
Mhm.
over and over again. Hopefully they keep increasing for you as a company.
Right.
But do things like congratulating people and reminding them when they start. Check-ins to
Mhm.
see how the job's going. How's your first day, your first week, your first month. And then if you're doing contract or temporary things, checking in around the end date. Are you getting
Right.
extended? You're looking for another opportunity. Are you going to the client's payroll? If so,
Mhm.
congratulations, you did an awesome job. So like that's an example. And then all sorts of things around the process side of, interview reminders, following up on client send outs and people that are interested in jobs, and just putting some of those patchwork things in place to create a smoother experience. A re-engagement campaign is always a top of mind, especially in a market like this, because you
Yeah.
have all of these candidates they haven't talked to in a while. So create a system where you can re-engage with them, but then more importantly, put something in place so that you don't have to re-engage with them in the future because they never slip out of control that you don't want them to. So, that kind of connection point.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what we see kind of on the large side of things. The medium-sized companies, in a lot of ways, can be kind of the sweet spot, because
Hmm.
you get the power of scale, but then you also you can move still pretty quickly.
Right. Everybody's
So
bought in because it's less people to make a decision on that.
right, and so that's what you see, usually a few offices, and it's kind of figuring out how you can make it work for multiple offices in a way that's consistent. But the medium-sized companies can typically adopt it and kind of and build quicker. But the interesting thing is the large company, even if they only do some 3 or 4 impactful automations, say in the first 6 months,
Yep.
at the scale of their database and the scale of their employees, that can still have a humongous ROI
Oh,
and
yeah.
impact overall. And then the medium size is when you start seeing maybe like one dedicated person. So it's not a team,
Okay.
maybe,
Okay.
but maybe one dedicated person who's managing those things. And of course, the danger there is if you have one expert and something happens to that person or they leave, you're in a bind, right? So it's
Right.
nice to have some fallback things in place. But then on the small side, what we see a lot is it's a person who's juggling 5 different things. So
Right.
and I've been in that role, and I have
Same.
all the sympathy in the world for it. I know how it goes, putting out fires and getting pulled in different directions. But the challenge there is kind of creating dedicated time so that you can help yourself kind of get out of that, right? So you can
Hmm.
build automations. So someone, oftentimes it's someone who's trying to do marketing, and then they're doing, they're
Yeah.
trying, they might have to dabble in recruiting or sales, and then they're helping some of the operations side. So
Yeah.
they're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And that's where we see a lot of I think success and some of the outsourcing and leveraging some of the resources or consulting arms, because it can give you kind of an extra boost for a period of time to launch something.
Content creation or strategy or physically building out the campaigns, things like that. Yeah.
And there's so much expertise in the industry that I think if you don't look at outsourcing or at least connecting with industry experts at some point, you're missing out, because you know, there's great knowledge and experience, you know, in these kind of third-party companies that you have an opportunity to tap into, you know, in a way that if you had to do that internally, it would take you a long time to get there, number one. But it costs you 10x it does the consulting services if you tried to bring that in-house yourself.
Right. Well, and on our team, we hired an individual named Tony Hoskins. I know you and he have chatted. You both have baseball backgrounds, which is always fun. And he came out of Thomson Reuters, you know, which is a very sizable company as a global automation coach. And they had a ton of different tools and technologies that they had to choose from and figure out how they all connected. And it's one of those things, you know, Billy, like you said, there's a lot of people in this industry that really nerd out about it and have developed a passion. And they're probably not 25 years into it because it hasn't been around that long. So it's like, if you can find someone who's even a few years into it, but has dedicated their focus on it, whether they're, you know, a marketer in a staffing firm that have kind of evolved into more of this technology role, or come from a different industry and now understand this space, it's interesting. You know, it's like you could have 2 years of dedicated focus on it and be pretty squared away for recommendations and advice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to find somebody who's gone on the journey, or who's either gone to where you want to be, right? Or so you can learn from their mistakes and get there quicker. And I think the cool part is, and you're like this, and I aspire to be, and there's a lot of people there, but people are so helpful, or want to be so helpful, where it's a lot of people give away that expertise for free, and it's awesome. Like, you just kind of have to, you know, stay checked in with the content they're putting out, or either videos or newsletters and that kind of thing. So there's so many resources that are available. I think that's the part that I get excited about, because you know, it's just kind of uplifting the industry, and I'm always kind of a high tide raises all boats kind of person. So it's not a scarcity mindset where you're worried about holding on to your expertise because, you know, you're scared somebody else is going to steal it and then go running with it. It's like, you know, give it away. You know, the industry thriving is going to be better for everyone.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Well, Billy, on that note, thank you so much for your time. This is so fun. I mean, automation and everything going on with Herefish is something that I could nerd out about for hours, just learning from some of the things that you've implemented and seen along the way. So just want to say thanks for your time. And if anybody's watching this and you're like, man, I've heard of this Build with Billy, reach out to Billy. Like, Billy's awesome, right? As you can see. So reach out to him, reach out to me if you have any thoughts or questions, or if you have an idea for a deeper fireside chat topic. You know, there's a few things you mentioned that I'm like, man, that could be a really interesting part 2, you know, so stay tuned for that maybe next year. But anyway, Billy, appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you thinking on me. And I said it's great to see what you all are doing at Parka and with the industry. So keep up the good work.
All right. Thanks so much. All right, everyone. Comment below if you have any thoughts or questions. Ping us separately if you're interested. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next fireside chat.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.